This review for Shadow of the Erdtree contains some minor early game spoilers. It's hard to believe it's been over 2 years since FromSoftware released their magnum opus, Elden Ring, a game that brought Hidetaka Miyazaki's near-perfected action RPG formula both into an open-world structure as well as to a wider, more mainstream audience. Refining the stamina-based combat and Metroidvania-like exploration that was introduced in Demon's Souls and perfected through countless preceding titles, Elden Ring absolutely blew me away with its sophisticated world building, refined mechanics and gorgeous map, creating what was easily my favourite game of 2022. And here we are in 2024, ready to hop once again onto Torrent and ride forth into a brand new map, with even more to discover as FromSoftware drop the eagerly awaited DLC, Shadow of the Erdtree. Now, make no mistake, this is no mere additional content. Shadow of the Erdtree, as is par for the course with FromSoftware DLC, represents very much an extension to the base game's late and end game content, and will challenge players from the off. The cost of entry is steep in itself, requiring the player to have bested 2 of the base game's more challenging boss battles, and it's highly recommended you venture into the new map, called the Shadowlands, with a hefty amount of levels under your belt. But from the moment you speak to Needle Knight Leder and touch Miquella's hand, it's immediately apparent that FromSoftware's old magic is back once more. The first thing that strikes you about Shadow of the Erdtree is how much darker and foreboding the map is in comparison to the first steps you take into Limgrave in Elden Ring. Again, this is very much on brand for FromSoftware, and the most immediate comparison I could make is Dark Souls 3's final DLC, The Ringed City. Where Shadow of the Erdtree also mirrors the Ringed City is in its punishing difficulty, introducing high-leveled enemies and bosses from the get-go that will punish even the most seasoned veteran players. But unlike those older, more linear Souls games, Shadow of the Erdtree's tough encounters are less about encouraging players to get good, but more about teaching them that perhaps the way forward is not as obvious as they think it is. Perhaps the cleverest thing FromSoftware has done in this DLC is front-load a pair of very challenging boss battles at the end of a pair of fairly straightforward legacy dungeons you can come across within the first hour or so with the game. Both of these bosses are tough as hell, sporting fast movesets that introduce a lot of elemental damage, and they're designed to utterly overwhelm players. What they're not designed to do, however, is present a roadblock. As with Elden Ring itself, Shadow of the Erdtree is an open world game, and any sensible player coming up against these blocks should simply turn around and see what else they can find, which is exactly what I did after bouncing off Relana countless times. Yes, I know, for Souls-like purists that may seem like blasphemy, but honestly, Shadow of the Erdtree's best feature is its map and the exploration it provides. While the map initially looks smaller than that of the base game, something you'd expect from an expansion pack, the smaller on-screen size is in fact incredibly deceptive. Where Elden Ring's Lands Between map was broad, allowing you to easily see and ride into new areas naturally, Shadow of the Erdtree presents a map that exists on a far more vertical scale. Almost immediately you'll see structures upon cliffs in the distance, strange, lush meadows and shorelines at the bottom of ravines, all with no obvious way to reach them, unless you get on Torrent and ride. Exploring the very edges of the map will frequently reward the player with discovery, be it a ravine to drop into or a cave that will spiral up to a plateau, and I spent most of the first 7 or 8 hours in Shadow of the Erdtree finding new areas to explore rather than throwing myself at hard enemies and bosses over and over. The world of the Shadowlands is beautiful, introducing some fantastic new concepts and areas that have visual storytelling which expands on the lore from the base game, as well as plentiful NPC questlines to sink your teeth into. It's this expanded sense of exploration and discovery that easily elevates it over the more linear map from the base game. Of course, you've got brand new loot to discover. Shadow of the Erdtree doubles down on the crafting from the base game, frequently giving you new cookbooks with new gadgets and gizmos to craft that you can throw at enemies or use to buff your character. While they're less frequent, you'll also find new weapons, armor sets and spells to experiment with, some of which are already creating some brand new builds in the game's meta. Shadow of the Erdtree really does encourage you to experiment with a much broader array of toys than I ever felt the base game did, and over the course of my time with it, I've already started to kit out my mage character with a different array of weapons, start to apply different Ashes of War abilities to help proc conditions better, and mix in some incantations with my spells to help tackle tougher challenges. There's also a feeling here that Shadow of the Erdtree wants you to play more with the Spirit Ash summons, a somewhat controversial mechanic among the hardcore Souls-like players who simply want to solo their way through these challenging games. While there are a handful of new summons, players will also find plentiful glovewort items to help them level up those they've brought in from the main game, and experimentation with different ones helped me through many a tough encounter. Elden Ring was never a linear boss rush game, and as Shadow of the Erdtree is positioned as a late game challenge, it definitely expects the player to have more doors open to them to be able to explore and experiment. But there's always the question of increasing your character's abilities to accommodate these new goodies. Shadow of the Erdtree's enemies do drop a healthy amount of runes apiece, meaning that even high level characters will still be able to add a few points into their stats during their adventure. And you'll even find some more larval tiers, the rare items that allow you to respec your character's stats around different tactics. Shadow of the Erdtree, however, has its own levelling system in the form of the Shadow Realm Blessing. There are two rare items you can find in the world, Shadowtree fragments and revered spirit ashes. Collect enough of these and at a site of grace you'll be able to level up their respective blessing. Shadowtree fragments give you a percentage increase to your attack and defense values per level you put in, while revered spirit ashes buff your spirit summons and Torrin, your spectral steed. Exploring early on will let you find bountiful of these, meaning that you can level up and have a better chance at those earlier bosses, but be aware these buffs are only valid when you're in the DLC and are not applied when you head back to the lands between, so don't expect to go back into the main game to stomp Malenia with your newfound strength. If there's one thing that lets Shadow of the Erdtree down, however, it's the thing that's plagued Elden Ring since our original review: performance. I've been playing Shadow of the Erdtree and indeed the Elden Ring base game on Xbox Series X through an LG OLED TV which supports VRR. Having sunk around 150 hours into the game, I've overall been happy with the frame rate in performance mode, despite the fluctuations that Ben pointed out in our initial tech review. While this has definitely been smoothed out over the last couple of years, Shadow of the Erdtree certainly brings some new issues to the table, from foliage pop-in and slight slowdown when warping to a site of grace, to a slightly more egregious slowdown in some early boss fights, which appear to still be present at the time of writing. It's not a massive deal breaker as the game is generally fairly solid, but these cracks certainly show that maybe FromSoftware's old engine hasn't quite stood up to the test of time. Despite these technical issues, however, I've gotten absolutely sucked into the world of Elden Ring once again with Shadow of the Erdtree. There's an immense amount of content to discover here that, as with the DLCs for Dark Souls series and Bloodborne before, feels like a true expansion of the main game rather than a simple side story. The lore adds layers to existing characters, concepts and biomes in the lands between, while the structure of the world will present equally as many head-scratching moments as Eureka's for the exploring player. Simply throwing yourself at every boss you find is not the key to unlocking the potential of Shadow of the Erdtree. This world is once again here to be explored, so saddle up, ride forth and uncover the mysteries of the Shadowlands. If you played and loved Elden Ring, this expansion is an absolute must-have, and we're giving it a healthy 9 out of 10. Thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to get all our latest updates. If you did like this video, do drop us a like down below and share your thoughts on Shadow of the Erdtree. And we will see you on our next video. Bye for now.